Hello, and welcome to Doctor Who 50 years ago, the show that looks back to the episode that aired in 1967 and looks at the differences between then and now. This week, the beginning to the epic Evil of the Daleks, written by David Whittaker. Let's have a romp in Chelsea. Why not? Just asking. I'm Ben.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Nick.
And here we are, and here we go into the news from 1967. On Sunday, the 14th of May, President Nasser of Egypt sent 2 divisions of his army across the Suez Canal into the Sinai Peninsula in response to a threatened Israeli invasion of Syria. Tensions are escalating throughout this week towards the Six-Day War, when the Middle East decides, let's kill each other, with the response of, at last! On Tuesday, the 16th of May, the UN are evicted from the border between Egypt and Israel. Furthermore, on Wednesday the 17th of May, the Egyptian Air Force covertly surveyed Israel's definitely possibly but probably not nuclear weapons program, accelerating the crisis further. Finally, on Friday the 19th of May, Egyptian troops crossed the Sinai and the Palestine Liberation Army took its positions inside the Gaza Strip, opening the war for the two sides to crash into each other and fight, eventually. The Middle East is blowing up out of all proportion after a good 22 years of tense-ish bits and pieces, what with the creation of the nation-state of Israel. It's a mess. And throughout these next 7 episodes, we're going to talk about the Six-Day War a lot. So enjoy while you can.
The significance of this, of the Six-Day War, is we're still living with the consequences of it now, where Palestine, Israel, etc. Still can't live together in peace. There's still conflicts because of the extra territory that Israel occupied after the war, the West Bank, Gaza Strip. And what was also significant for the period was that this war led to the Arab states becoming more Soviet-aligned and the Israelis becoming more American-aligned. And this would fully play out in the Yom Kippur War, about 5 years later or so.
And finally, on Thursday the 18th of May, American and South Vietnamese troops crossed into the demilitarized zone separating North from South to engage the enemy. The number of daily US deaths passed 100 for the first time. Here we see more fighting, more international conventions and armistice broken. It's going so well for the UN and others this week.
It really is.
It really is. War is a staple of 1967 news, and it's only fitting that a serial about war between these fascistic pepperpots coincides with news of terror and violence and death and destruction and all that jazz.
So the significance of getting to the point where 100 soldiers dying every day is that as more and more young men come back home in body bags, the more and more unpopular the war is going to get. People don't like it when their friends, family members, etc. die.
Especially when they didn't volunteer to join the army.
So this will only just cause public opinion to turn further against the Vietnam War. And these deaths really do inflict a massive psychological wound in the United States psyche, as it were, because everyone knew someone who was fighting in the war. It's a traumatic event for the American public.
There we are. That was the news. And now we shall get into episode 1 of Evil of the Daleks, written by that there David Whittaker, the second of his 2 serials.
Yeah, because Terry Nation at the time was off trying to sell his Dalek spin-off series, The Destroyers, to the American market because he liked money.
For Evil of the Daleks, we know it as one of those great epics, this chess battle, this final battle of the 60s between the Doctor as the authority figure, peace, justice and all that jazz, versus the total, quite literally namesake in the title, evil of the Daleks. And yet, this episode starts as a sort of crime drama, romping about on contemporary Earth with gay abandon.
It's interesting that you say gay abandon, because this episode basically abandons the Daleks. This is the only time the show has managed to pull this trick off, because it's been aware of it. It says Evil of the Daleks in big letters at the beginning. It would have been advertised in Radio Times, presumably. And if we look at Attack of the Cybermen, the cliffhanger to the first episode that there's Cybermen in it. I mean, who even cares by that point? Here, it's so strange to see the Doctor run around looking at cigarette packets hanging out in bars. It's got this menace to it, because we feel we're looking at the wrong bit. And so when the ending finally hits, it's one of those really chilling Dalek reveals.
So the first thing that I noticed about this episode was that it really does establish a very different atmosphere to the Faceless Ones. Even though we initially start in the same place, we immediately are greeted to new music that's more stereotypical Doctor Who music that's very, of the 60s anyway, it's very over the top. And so it kind of creates this kind of, crime caper story.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way of doing it. Seeing them run around in a sort of run around romp. Yeah, that's it. And the thing is, oh, go on.
I would say it's quite entertaining. It's quite slow, however, to build up, but does work as an introduction and a good way of separating itself from the Faceless Ones.
Yeah, and in that spirit, the Faceless Ones started with this chase scene and chameleons and all that stuff. Here, it's much more restrained to cigarette packets and things like that. And that's another way it really interestingly separates itself from the events of last week. It's this brilliant crossover period.
It's quite a good episode. Let's get into it. The Doctor and Jamie are looking for the TARDIS, conveniently stolen off the back of a lorry. A worker tells them it's been taken by a J. Smith and a Leatherman firm. Said worker is working with another man named Kennedy, trained on the Doctor and Jamie's progress. It's all very complicated. Most conspiracies are. The two chase down the worker with a taxi all the way to freaking Chelsea, whilst Kennedy works with the brains of the operation, Mr. Waterfield. We open here with a crime drama on contemporary Earth. As I said, it's out of place, but I love this episode for it. And additionally, the taxi from Gatwick to Chelsea would have cost a hefty £123, but it's all right, because the taxi driver seemingly doesn't get a penny. It's all very conspiratorial and not necessarily good for the kids who have literally just been billed Daleks in the title.
What? Yeah, you say that, but what's so good is how it's not really getting to a point. That's what's so interesting.
The point, I suppose, of this episode is to build up suspense for the reveal of the Daleks.
Yeah, and the masterful way it builds that suspense is by looking at anything except things we know from the Dalek stories. Up until this point, we've had Alien Planet, a really strange escapist plot on Earth, a run-around romp in space with stuttery Daleks that was weird and stupid. We've had the Daleks master plan, and then we've had Power of the Daleks. Incredibly spacey stories. To have this one set on Earth throws the audience off. Interesting.
Waterfield owns an antique shop and is constantly baffling the poshest man in the world, Mr. Perry, with his Victorian timepieces. And this is consequently where the TARDIS has been taken to, this antique shop. Perry, meanwhile, baffles Waterfield with his modern lingo, making Waterfield look even more Victorian. The Doctor and Jamie trace Kennedy and the worker, but at the mention of knocking the Doctor and Jamie out, the worker says no. Kennedy knocks out the worker and gets away, leaving just enough evidence for the Doctor and Jamie to follow Kennedy to a coffee bar. It's a paper trail, luring the Doctor to the more interesting bits of the episode.
The thing about this bit is that you could write this technically in your sleep if you were a 60s writer, because we're picking up clues at the start of the story. It feels like one of those 1 hour dramas that you get starring a policeman, whatever. However, here, it's doing it at the start of a 7-part story.
I guess. It's the difficulty of having 7 parts, again, especially as a season finale. You really need to bring up huge things. So to start with the TARDIS being stolen, yes, that helps. Then there's a conspiracy, who's behind the conspiracy, and then once we've learnt who is behind the conspiracy, it's then what are they doing other than trying to kill the Doctor and take over everything in the goddamn world.
The thing is about this story is that it will build up and up until that big climactic battle with the Emperor Dalek. And so, in order to really make that seem truly epic, to have this contrast with the opening part where we are stuck trying to learn about the Daleks' plan. Compare this to Power of the Daleks near the start of the season. That one feels epic as an opener, and it gets more and more constricted to the colony. Here, we start small and we build up to an epic showdown that is supposed to be the end of the Daleks, ramping up the tension basically from first principles.
Kennedy tells Waterfield that the Doctor has gone where he wants them to, and Waterfield organises a proxy meeting between Perry and the Doctor and Jamie, all the while being Victorian in manner and assumption. Waterfield's also got a hidden room with futuristic devices and antiques aplenty, which is very suspicious. Kennedy is getting suspicious about Waterfield and his future devices and mannerisms and such. My key point for this episode is the Treacle Bar, one of my favourite Second Doctor scenes. In contrast to the First Doctor being all cerebral with computer scientists at the top of the space age post office tower, high authority figures, computers, scientists and all that jazz. Here, the Second Doctor chooses to slum in the Treacle Bar. That image of this science fiction man in contemporary Earth, literally less than a few metres away from girls dancing to the Seekers music and the Beatles music, where Jamie is flirting because he's being Fraser Hines, and the Doctor his mood is reflected by 2 music pieces. Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen by the Seekers and Paperback Writer by the Beatles. Well, at least the first one, because he's all depressed that the TARDIS has been stolen and he knows he's being lured into a trap, but he wants his TARDIS back, and the only way to find out what the menace is to, go into that trap. Yeah, it's a marvellous image to place, and I feel it's one of the underrated scenes for the Second Doctor.
The scene in the cafe, I'd say, is very much a continuation from the Faceless Ones, where Jamie kissed a girl on screen. This is very much establishing him as being the teenage heartthrob, etc. So he's very much there for the girls.
It's interesting you say that they're trying to appeal to that demographic, because Waterfield is incredibly out of touch. Perry is incredibly out of touch. The people who should be completely alienated by this scenario, that of the Doctor and Jamie, they're the ones who are able to integrate themselves. It makes Waterfield even more unsettling, knowing that the Doctor is able to put himself into one of these situations that the demographic you were just talking about would identify with so much. So, to the 60s viewer, it would make Waterfield, by contrast, he's the time traveller that just can't fit in. It's even more suspicious.
Eventually, the Doctor and Jamie are lured to the antique shop of Edward Waterfield's. I think that's his name.
Yeah, it is his name.
Aware of being lured into a trap, something it will take the next episode to do. but Waterfield himself is a trap for a greater evil, which now has a theme song of its own, which is very easy to play by the piano, by the way. Something Kennedy learns about through hearsay and the hard way. Kennedy breaks into Waterfield's future room whilst Waterfield is waiting for the doctor to arrive. He snoops around to learn about something about Waterfield, only to be attacked by said greater evil, a Dalek. And so that gets people to watch the next episode, and so on and so forth, before the episode does its dramatic left turn towards Victorian England.
Well, I suppose that left turn to Victorian England, it's not the most Dalek-y of Dalek places to be, but it is interesting to see them there. Especially if the Daleks are meant to be these fascistic figures at this point, seeing them in the place that nowadays we think of as that bit where there was the Empire and the white man overlord. In the 60s, it was this crumbling empire. So to see the Daleks utilise someone from that era, and for the person from that era to be so useless, it makes the Daleks seem all the more scary. The people that you thought were these, as we would call them, old white men nowadays, be reduced so, and the fascists be so strong over them. It's as though they're crushing the past from which the 60s viewer believes in. Especially considering that the fears of World War II and the rise of fascism to re-crush England were still here, seeing them basically conquer Victorian England would have been very, very effective.
You discover in real time along with
Kennedy,
what's going on. So in this instance, he's the audience surrogate.
Yeah, in this reveal, we're seeing it through the eyes of the person who's been watching over the TARDIS crew and Waterfield over the events of the episode. And to have him so terrified, it makes the audience terrified as well. Even the guy who is sneaking around seeing everything, even he is scared. That's really scary. An interesting audience surrogate.
Indeed, the interesting bit of history between 50 years ago and now is that Doctor Who is now being sold in China. The Eastern world shows you how international and global the brand has become, whereas still in 1967 it's this quaint little sci-fi series which has just survived the biggest evolution any sci-fi series could do, change its lead actor and still maintain major villains, major characters.
Yeah, while the Avengers switched out its main character and characters, that was always more of an anthology piece. With James Bond, no one really cares whether or not James Bond is the same person from film to film. Whereas here, in a sci-fi universe, to pull off a complete rewrite of continuity, basically, to go in a completely new direction, it is a testament to the skill of everyone involved that they were able to make something which would survive.
Yeah, it's a pretty successful thing that builds up to the international 21st century that we hear today and all the global deals.
Does anyone have anything else to say, or should we do concluding thoughts?
My concluding thoughts about the episode. Once again, I shall say that this episode is a very slow opening for a 7-parter, which is waiting for its major reveals of Waterfield's from Victoria, from the Victorian times. He's working for the Daleks, etc., etc. Ooh, look, Skaro. Ooh, look, humongously huge, humongously weird plan of the Daleks. But it's the quaint contemporary Earth setting that just about sells it for me, despite the fact 15 minutes in, you're wondering, oh dear God, why won't it end?
It's perfect. Silence.
Yeah, all in all, I would say this was a good episode. a bit slow, but I suspect it will speed up over the next few weeks.
I obviously, yeah, it's a bit slow, but as someone who reads big books about grammar and thinks that it's fun, I guess I just don't care if it's slow. And it doesn't feel slow, it feels like it's packing things into me. It's not like the Space Pirates, where it's long, but nothing actually happens. I feel this is a lot more on the lines of the Silurians, where it's methodical and includes as much as it can in order to build things up for later. But then I'm also a sucker for the Silurians, so I'm probably not the best person to ask. All in all, I really like this episode, as ever.
Thank you very much for watching. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes. Leave positive comments there, it helps. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube, where you can like, comment and subscribe, and Google Plus if you dare. We shall be back next week to deal with the last surviving episode. We shall see it. Episode 2 of Evil of the Daleks. Until then, I have been Ben.
I have been Luke.
And I have been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye. Doctor Who 50 years ago returns at the same time next week. And now, here's a rotten old YouTube advert.